Hello friends, I've been thinking about consumerism and the church's response to consumerism, which I think is really pretty interesting. So I'm going to be talking about that today. I'm Carmen Schenk and welcome to Think Out Loud, where I unpack the ideas and assumptions of my youth. And today's show has been brought to you by the Simplicity Mindset, where I share the stories of how and why of simplicity and the purpose of it all so that we can make room for meaning and mission. And we can maybe address that thing of external wealth with internal poverty. And we can pay attention to the condition of the earth, which is not good right now. And this is Opus number 1. So I just came across this idea that in the 1800s, people were beginning to be able to afford a little bit more than their normal. And their normal in those days was the clothes that they showed up in. That means one outfit. Oh boy. And a plate, a cup, something to eat with on, and maybe some tools. So it wasn't that everybody had a house. It wasn't anything like that. People had a very small group of possessions. Now, these days we'd call somebody like that a minimalist, pretty hardcore minimalist. But that was just life then. And then some things began to change and some things became modernized and people began to be able to afford little luxuries, an embroidered handkerchief or a beautiful little pair of scissors for when they're doing their embroidery, or a little this or a little that, whatever. These things began to be available to the ordinary person. And the church was like, you shouldn't buy that stuff. You shouldn't fall to that stuff because what matters is your connection to God. That's what you need to be focused on, being connected to God. And all of this stuff is a distraction and will keep you and will lead you away from God. And they called it vanity, which I think is so interesting because now fast forward a couple hundred years and you've got the Jesus wants you to be wealthy people who literally are suggesting that Jesus wants you to have stuff that other people around the globe don't have, and the creating of that stuff is actually harming people. And yes, Jesus wants you to be wealthy and to have all these things. And okay, now pick one. I mean, what is the truth here? Does Jesus want us to be paying attention to what we're consuming so that we're not, distracted by vanity? Or does Jesus want you to be healthy, wealthy, and wise? I mean, what? I mean, really, what? Because if you look at what happens in the earth with consumerism, just the textile industry. There's some really surprising statistics that I just came across the other day. In the UK, women wear their clothes an average of 7 times before it either goes to the attic or to the trash. In the United States, 30% of the clothes that are purchased are never even worn and never even left the closet. And in Denmark, young people are now buying clothes instead of washing the ones they have. This is horrifying. This is genuinely horrifying because the chemicals that are involved in growing something like cotton and the water that's required, and it's not a sustainable crop. And there are almost slave labor, they're paid so little that it's just, again, horrifying. And so all of these unjust things are happening in the production of that item. And we're using it so little, and then it's being thrown away. And the fastest growing sector is self-storage. I mean, literally, we are storing and storing our stuff, and it's costing us money. It's costing us money to buy the stuff. It's costing us money to store the stuff. It's costing us money to organize the stuff. And because our tax dollars pay for the landfills, it's actually costing us money to just throw the stuff away. So the only solution that I know of is to need less. I buy used clothing instead of new because I'm just really struggling with what else happening in the textile market. It's not, the textile industry is really doing some damage to the earth. I mean, what industry isn't, but it's rough out there, you guys. And so when you look at the 18th century where the church is telling people, don't pay attention to what's happening out there, don't buy all the fripperies and vanities, versus today's church, which is Jesus wants you to be wealthy and to consume and consume and consume and consume, never mind that it's destroying the earth and filling up God's beautiful earth with trash. Where's the truth? Because I think if we are realistic and we see how opposed those two ideas are, first of all, it points out how fallible the church is. And second of all, how connected church and culture are. These ideas that are so completely opposite. But where does the truth lie in there? And I think the story that's been really resonating with me a lot lately is the story of St. Francis of Assisi, who was the son of a very wealthy cloth merchant. And this story is that he stood before the judge and renounced his inheritance and his family, and took off all his clothes. And a priest came and wrapped him in his cloak, and so he wouldn't stand there naked anymore. But there is a thing, science, that I read about your dopamine levels. It's called rich kid syndrome, and it's the idea that when you have at your fingertips everything you could possibly ever want, and you don't have the opportunity to actually work for something, and you just have pleasure after pleasure after pleasure without the work period, without the striving, without the setting a goal and reaching it, without any of that, it fries out the dopamine center in your brain. And so what happens is you have everything you could possibly want, but you don't feel pleasure in any of it, because it fries out the dopamine center in the brain. I just think that's really interesting, and that's where we have, parents telling their kids, "I'm gonna, you're gonna have what I wanted but never could have," and not realizing that's actually doing harm. So it's really quite interesting. So leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Where has the church been right, and where has the church missed it? Because it can't both be true. Fundamentally, where I come out, and what I love about the story of St. Francis of Assisi is that he had the sense that God was calling him to rebuild the church. And so historically, as they tell the story, that he was married to poverty. That was his wife, was poverty. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that wording. I think he had every wealth at his fingertips, and he found that it was unsatisfactory. And when he had an encounter with God, he found that gave him meaning and purpose in a whole new way that he didn't find in the wealth of his family. And I think that's the thing. That's the part that gives me hope, because it's not that we're getting married to poverty. I think that's a poor expression of it. What I think is what is a remarkable opportunity is that if we own less, and if we are not pulled in 1,000 directions by that stuff and by the strings that are attached to in all the different ways, right? That if we can set aside some of that stuff to the degree that we get a new perspective, we can actually focus on making the world a better place. We can focus on more God consciousness in our life. We can have meaning and mission, but we can't have it at the same time that we are piled under materialism and consumerism. They are mutually exclusive. And so I think that faith, ancient faith, that is connected with everyday current faith, is that the reality is it's okay to be wealthy, but it makes a lousy goal. Wealth makes a lousy goal, because it does not have a side effect of happiness like we've been told it does. What does have a side effect of happiness, unlike what we're told, is that if we focus on meaning and mission, if we serve well, if we serve humanity, if we are generous. Culture teaches us to be very selfish and self-preservation and keep and don't ever give, and poor people are undeserving and all of that garbage. But the truth of the matter is that the more generous we are, the more we experience happiness and meaning and purpose. And that's an end in itself. And you guys, it feels like there's so much, because I'm uncomfortable with realizing that the ancient Christianity and the current Christianity are two completely different things. And it just shows how connected religion and culture can be, and how dangerous that combination can be. Because if we understand who Jesus is, the real Jesus, not the mascot of this and that other idea, but the real Jesus, I think it will be fundamentally liberating. And so one of the things that I find in myself is I'm sort of a minimalist in the sense that if it doesn't fit on the property, we don't own it. The property is a lot bigger than it needs to be, though. But our house is 660 square feet. So literally, if it doesn't fit in the house, then if we buy something, then something else has to go. I mean, literally, we don't need anything because our house is very nicely outfitted for what we need it to do. And I've got a cart for everything else. I mean, no, it's just interesting. It's just interesting to think about these things and find, and seek to find that place of peace and truth, because in a world where there is somebody on that side and somebody on that side, and they are both screaming, "I have the truth for you," I think the challenge is to look at one and really listen, and look at the other and really listen, because so much of evangelicalism is, I've chosen to trust that person, therefore I will do what that person tells me. And that's fundamentally extremely flawed, because, we will go down a very uncomfortable road if we just choose to trust people and don't do our own research and don't do our own thinking. So fundamentally, I come back to, number one, need less. Number two, focus on meaning and mission. When we are focusing on meaning and mission, I think we're rich here. And when we are focusing on that success status signaling, wearing an expensive purse that I can't really afford so that I look wealthy, I think fundamentally that leaves us in a place of inward poverty. Because instead of spending our resources on our passion and our purpose, we're actually spending it on status signaling, and it's robbing us of actually pursuing our purpose and our passions and our meaning and mission. And fundamentally, that's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. So thank you for joining me today as I've been thinking out loud. Like this video, subscribe, and if you've been talking about these things with somebody else and want to share this video with them, that would be cool by me. This episode is brought to you by my intensive course, The Simplicity Mindset, where I share the stories of my own journey, the how of simplicity, the why, and what I've been working on recently, which is the purpose of simplicity, so that we can make room for meaning and mission, so that we can live in a way that's responsible in terms of, and ethical in terms of the earth, so that we can live in a place of peace with God and each other. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And I will be back with Opus number 2. See you soon.